welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamed here with you, along with Zach Malamed. Zach, a couple weeks off. We're back at it again, right before free agency picks up. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. A bit of a crazy time here at school, but I'm excited to get a little break here, talk some fantasy football. Something we love here.
Yeah, something that we absolutely love, and it is a getaway from the real world for a lot of people, and we're excited to be a small part of that. Subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us a thumbs up and go check out some of the previous episodes that we've had. We talked some buy lows and some sell highs in the dynasty perspective. Last week or a couple weeks ago, we did our free agency previews where we started out with our quarterback position. Today, we are previewing the running back position, which is sure to be an exciting one this offseason. A lot of change expected in the NFL. And then, either next week or the week after that, we're going to do some pass catchers and get to some, wide receivers and tight ends. And let's get right into it. There's really no news that we've had over this last week. Normally we jump right in with some news, but the only real news that I've seen over the last week was that they restructured Geno Smith's contract a little while ago after he got $12.7 million last week, and they let him get that money. Now it seems like he will be their starter, at least for the short-term future. And we'll see if they end up going in the draft or anything like that as a developmental quarterback. But till then, we really don't know. We just know that Geno's getting paid.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. That's just this time of year. You get some news some days, you get no news other days. This has been a little bit of a boring stretch here. Just not much going on.
Yeah, just saw that the Chiefs also signed the punt god earlier today. He is back, and hopefully he can make the team out of camp. And but away we go here. Let's start out here now with our free agent preview as the running back position. And Zach, this is a position that we've been talking about pretty much all fantasy season, about how much it has changed from last season. It seems like there's only a couple of these workhorse backs that can single-handedly run their backfield, some of which are going to be free agents this year. The league's sort of changing a bit, though, and we're seeing a lot of these 1-2 punches around the league. Do you think that there will continue to be 1-2 punches, or do you think that some of these guys that are at the top of the free agency class will end up being able to be workhorse backs?
So it kind of depends here. I think based on looking at some of the names here, of course, you got guys like Saquon Barkley, guys like Josh Jacobs, who in our minds, yeah, they're probably number ones, like clearly number ones, of course. But like when it comes to being a workhorse back, I think those guys definitely fit those roles. I think there's other teams where, because you can really only say that, I would think, Brett, about probably 4 or 5 guys in football right now. It's difficult to say certain guys after that, even guys you would say are like top 10 running backs. It's difficult to say that they are still going to be just a number one. Nobody's behind them helping them out. It's very difficult right now, especially in the running back market, how running backs are so open to injuries in the league today. So, there's always kind of a backup plan there, and multiple guys usually get integrated into an offense. So I think it's probably about 3 or 4 guys, Brett, that you can say, all right, they can clearly just be a workhorse and they don't need anybody behind them, unless it comes down to injury right now.
All right, so let's go just like what we did a couple weeks ago. We're going to go team by team here. Obviously, this one's going to be a little different because, as we did mention, the league is different. But let's just take the workhorse back, those top tier free agents or whatever. And we'll go team by team and do the same sort of exercise where, listen, would they pair with this number one running back or this number 1-2 that they already have there? So let's start out AFC East. We're going to start out in Buffalo. James Cook right now seems to be the guy there. It seemed like they were putting in, a mix of different guys down the stretch. They ended up bringing in Lat Murray. They had Damian Harris. last year it was Zach Moss, but obviously he got traded right away at the trade deadline to Indianapolis. What do we think about the Bills here potentially going out and getting somebody alongside James Cook?
I don't think it's going to end up being any of the top guys here. I think James Cook has kind of taken his role as the number one. Of course, with Zach Moss right behind him, I don't know if they're like excited to bring Zach Moss back. I think it'll end up just being another guy and bringing him in to be behind a guy like James Cook, probably a guy with a lot more experience. I think maybe one of those veteran running backs. I mean, they had, of course, Lat Murray, as well as they brought in Damian Harris as well. So more experienced players to have behind Cook. But I mean, I think this is Cook's backfield at this point to lose.
Yeah, we even saw Leonard Fournette get signed later on in the season. Like, I agree with you. I think that that's a team that you're going to see a veteran guy come in. There were a lot of concerns very early in the season on James Cook, just about the fumbles. Obviously, he figured that out as we went along in the season, to the point where they trusted him. They switched offensive coordinators, and they trusted him pretty much every single down. He became a 3-down workhorse back down the stretch of the season. He was out there for passing downs, which he really didn't get to do a lot earlier in his career. And so, yeah, I agree. I think this is James Cook's backfield. They probably won't go out and get this top tier running back. Let's keep moving along. Miami, obviously, they have a huge decision with Mostert and Wilson, but it seems like Devon Achane, he'll be there. Don't see this team going after anyone.
I agree. I think Mostert's going to end up getting a pretty nice deal. I mean, there's no reason that you can tell me Miami should go away from him, even for like the money he's going to want. Like he was everything that they needed for this offense. They needed a running back who can get into the end zone. And I mean, he was, I think, I don't know if he finished top of the league. He might've been there, but like he was in that range, like unbelievable season. So I think I'm expecting them to bring him back as well. Of course, with alongside Achane, I think Jeff Wilson will probably just be the odd man out there because you got those two guys in Achane and Mostert. I don't think you could go away from them.
Yeah, agree. Keep moving along here. New York Jets, they right now have Breece Hall at the top of the chain, and I think that he's going to end up being one of those guys when it's said and done at the end of the year. He dealt with some injuries coming off the ACL. I think that he proved everybody wrong. Everybody kind of thought that Dalvin Cook was going to be in there and he was going to take the role at first. Breece hit the ground running, and it seemed like Dalvin was almost an afterthought. Only 2 running backs on the roster right now, him and Izzy Abanikanda. So that they're going to at least go out and get somebody, whether it's in the draft or a veteran. Probably not going to be one of these workhorse guys, though.
Definitely not. It's similar to Buffalo, where it's going to end up being like, okay, in that instance, it's James Cook's backfield, and you probably get a veteran behind him. I think the Jets probably do the same thing. I don't know if he's going to get every single touch like some of the guys that we talk about, Brett, but I do think there's going to be a veteran behind him.
Yeah, moving along, New England, they have Ramondre Stevenson. Didn't have an amazing year last year, especially when you compare it to the year before. They did bring in Zeke Elliott. He is a free agent coming up, and we'll talk about him in a bit. But it seems like New England's going to have to figure out some sort of 1-2 punch, because I don't know that Ramondre was able to hold the workload just based on the fact that they didn't really have any talent around him.
Yeah, I agree. Their offensive line was pretty awful. So I think that stands out. You got to fix that. I think I agree with you. It's going to end up for Ramondre being a part of a 1-2 punch, whatever it is. He can't handle the workload of a guy like James Cook or Breece Hall. I do agree with you. He's more of a receiving back. So I mean, that's kind of what you have to look at with Ramondre. He's more of that receiving back than he is a pure running back. I would think a guy like an Ezekiel Elliott, maybe a different player from it, that kind of player, just a power running back right next to Ramondre is what New England needs.
Going over to the AFC West, Kansas City, looks like Isaiah Pacheco is going to just stick, and they're going to use him as a bit of a workhorse there, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon, big decisions coming along, both of which are free agents. So you can be sure that the Chiefs, who have been just the last couple of years, they're trying to figure out their running back position. They're probably going to go out and get another weapon. I'm curious if it's going to end up being a bit of a pass catcher, though, so that they can kind of let Pacheco settle into a role.
Yeah, I will say I would be a little bit surprised if both of those guys, CEH as well as Jerick McKinnon, both went out the door. I think they can probably pick one of the two. I don't know who that's going to be because, of course, CEH's big thing is pure running, but Pacheco looks like a mean guy running through the backfield. So that could just be his role from now on for Kansas City. A guy like Jerick McKinnon, though, I mean, a receiving back, you give the defense a different look in the passing game. I think that could be a move for Kansas City to just bring him back and have those two.
Yeah, we saw McKinnon break off a couple big screen passes for long runs. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that that's going to end up being the move. We'll talk CEH in a bit, but yeah, I think that they're going to end up getting rid of CEH. I don't know that they've been deemed a success with that pick.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so moving along to Las Vegas, and here's where we hit our first huge free agent. It's Josh Jacobs, and we're going to talk Josh Jacobs in just a touch. But Zamir White sitting behind him. This is one of those teams that a lot of money to spend and, a lot of needs, it really seems like. And we're not really sure about the future of Davante Adams. A lot of rumors are flying about potential trades. This seems like they won't spend big at running back because there's just too many other needs. They might head themselves into a bit of a rebuild here, try to get some picks.
It would be interesting. I think my first instinct tells me that how can Las Vegas give up on Josh Jacobs? Like he's been so good for them. Of course, the last year was a bit off for everybody in Las Vegas. So, but the year before, I mean, he had an argument as the best running back in football, Brett. So, very difficult to give up on a guy like that, even though it's going to be worth a lot of money. Like, I think that's their main piece. I think that's who they build their team around. And I know it's difficult for teams to say, oh, well, we're building around a running back because of all that goes on in this running back market. But I think they're going to lose a guy like Davante in this offseason. However it's going to be, I would be a little bit iffy if I don't know how I would feel if they gave up on a guy like Josh Jacobs, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's going to be pretty difficult. There is a potential that they can tag him and he'd make, I think it's just over $14 million. That might be the move. It might not make him very happy. But at the same time, I think that, like you just said, I don't know that you can give up on a guy like Josh Jacobs, especially with the success that he had a couple years ago. And it wasn't as great this year. It wasn't as shiny, but he still got the job done. He still was one of their main pieces here. So we'll talk him in a second. Denver, interesting situation. We talked Javonte quite a bit down the stretch here, and McLaughlin and what he added along with Pirine while Javonte was hurt. I think this is going to be one of those committees. They might go a bit younger. They might go draft pick or something like that. I don't really see any of the big guys going here to Denver, though.
I agree. It's not really the spot for Denver here. I think you said it. Maybe a younger guy, maybe a veteran like they brought in with Pirine this past year. But I mean, Javonte's going to be one of the guys. The question is who's the other guy and how much of a split role is it going to be? That's going to be the question heading into this season.
Moving over to the last team here, it's the Los Angeles Chargers, and another big decision coming. I think that it's going to end up being Austin Eckler back there. New regime. Jim Harbaugh comes in, and obviously he's not going to want to stick around for like a rebuild or anything, especially when you have a really young Justin Herbert, a team that looks like it could win now, and it's still, there's tons of pieces and tons of weapons that they have on this team. It didn't really reflect how they ended up finishing at 5-12. This is going to be one of those big running backs, I think. And, it could be Eckler, it could be somebody else. But you could be sure that, when it comes to the them freeing up money via a wide receiver potentially being cut, that money's going to end up going to one of these running backs.
That's fair. I mean, Eckler's an iffy one right now. I think obviously we'll talk about him in a bit, but if Los Angeles truly wants him, I think they're gonna have to give him some money. I think he's not gonna really stand for much else than that at 29 years old now. And I mean, he's had some really good seasons recently. Obviously, this past one is the worst one of the last like four. But I mean, those 3 seasons, he was unreal. So I think Harbaugh is going to want to keep him. I agree.
Yeah. All right. So moving along to the AFC North, Baltimore. Seems like everybody's a free agent in Baltimore. You have Gus Bus, he's a free agent. J.K. Dobbins coming off the injury, he's a free agent. Dalvin Cook, who they added on in the playoffs, he's a free agent. This is a team that really aggressively went after some running backs and by the trade deadline. Think this is going to be another spot where one of those guys go. They really want to hone in on running the ball. Potentially a Derrick Henry landing spot. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They went after him pretty hard at the trade deadline, didn't end up getting him. But, a team that's 13-4, right there on the cusp, and, potentially can get a running back to put them over the top.
I agree. I mean, their main focus is running the football. That's their offense. So I do think they could end up getting one of those top guys. There is question marks there of how much they're going to want to give one of those running backs because they're usually a team that's okay with just having multiple running backs and working through an offense. So it would be interesting how much they would pay up for one of those top guys.
Moving along, and we head to Cleveland, where the Cleveland Browns, after an 11-6 season, they lost Nick Chubb early. He's going to end up coming back. Jerome Ford looked like he had it pretty good. And then you have Kareem Hunt, who is a free agent as well. But again, I think this is going to be one of those where they almost do what they did last year, kind of bring in that stopgap just in case Nick Chubb is not ready. It was a pretty gruesome injury, and he's made some pretty good progress, it seems, since the injury. But yeah, this is going to be one of those depth options like a Kareem Hunt or something like that, just to kind of shore it up and make sure that position's good. Yeah,
I agree. I think that based on the timeline, it was a bad injury. You said it. So kind of still waiting on that, and obviously there's a lot of time still then, but I agree, probably grabbing one of those other guys to come in and just hold down the fort for Nick Chubb until he comes back.
All right, so we head out to Pittsburgh, where that two-headed weapon, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, they're both going to be on the team next year. So I don't think that this is a spot at all that's going to be improving at running back. I think that we'll probably see sort of what we saw last year with that 50-50 split as we headed down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, get a quarterback. That's their job this offseason.
Yeah. Pretty much. Russell Wilson, it seems like, is the big name out there. We'll see how that goes. And Russell Wilson, they haven't even announced that they cut him yet. Not expecting it at all. But Cincinnati, we head right to Joe Mixon. I think that it's all said and done. We're talking about a potential depth option behind him. Maybe one of those guys that's the lower tier of free agency. One of those veteran guys that can come in.
Yeah, I mean, they had 2 really good young running backs behind them, Chase Brown and as well as Williams behind them. So, I mean, those 2 guys were doing a good job behind Joe Mixon, but he's kind of been a workhorse back. Like, he's gotten a ton of work the last couple of years. So why go away from that?
All right, so heading over to the Houston Texans as we head to the AFC South. Devin Singletary, he's a free agent, but they do have Dameon Pierce. Zach, I think this is another potential landing spot for one of these guys where we almost see a 1-2 punch with Dameon Pierce. It looked like, at least from the end of last season to the middle of this season, that Dameon Pierce wouldn't be able to be a workhorse back. He would need a guy with him. Devin Singletary started to get more carries as we approached the end of the season. And I just think that while Pierce is a great running back, the workload it can't be what it was when he first came into the league and they were almost running him into the ground. There's going to be somebody alongside him. I don't know if it's going to be one of those top tier guys, but it might be one of those, middle tier or the lesser of the top tier guys. It's all going to really come down to money. But again, this is a young, talented team that is going to look to try to take that next step.
Yeah, I agree, Brett. I think their focus is probably going to be more in the passing game and get a pass catcher out of the backfield. Singletary, I mean, he was that in Buffalo. A little bit less this year, but still he was the pass catching back. I think Dameon Pierce is more of a power back, and to get maybe one of those receiving backs that are in the free agency market, put him next to Dameon Pierce, I definitely think it would bring this Houston offense to another level.
Moving along to Jacksonville, where it was, obviously the Travis Etienne show, but behind Travis Etienne, at first it looked like it was going to be Tank Bigsby. That fizzled out pretty quickly, and it seemed that D'Ernest Johnson ended up winning the backup role. He's now a free agent, and so he was only making $1 million last year. So there is the potential that they just basically say, okay, well, we're going to bring you back. But there's also the potential that they go out and draft somebody to sit ahead of Tank Bigsby or bring in a veteran, because it didn't really look like Bigsby had much to the explosiveness that he did in the preseason and that hype coming out of the draft.
Yeah, I agree. I think looking at it, you probably would bring in a veteran for those two running backs. They're both young, still a lot of time in the NFL. So giving them that third guy as a veteran, I definitely think will help them. And I mean, D'Ernest Johnson is a perfect one if you bring him back. So probably just staying in that area though.
Now we head to a little bit of an interesting spot in Indianapolis. Obviously you have Jonathan Taylor here, and he got paid. He's obviously going to stick around for a couple more years there. But behind him, Zach Moss had a really good year, especially when Taylor was not there. And now he's a free agent. So, I'm not sure that there's going to be a way that they can work him in. Behind them, they have Evan Hull and Trey Sermon, who really were not effective. Very minimal impact on the team. This could be another one of those depth signing potential, steps in the draft, potential picks. I think that this is a team where they potentially are going to go after maybe a tight end, maybe wide receiver here, and that'll be more of the focus than the running back position, what seems to have been solidified with the Jonathan Taylor contract.
Exactly. It's more of just Taylor's going to be the guy, and then whoever's behind them, okay. So I think they have, you mentioned it, a couple rookies there. Maybe bring in a veteran. I mean, that's basically it. But it's Taylor's backfield. That's they've made that clear with that contract extension of him this past season.
Our final team here in the AFC is the Tennessee Titans, and Zach, we talked about Derrick Henry and the potential that he does end up coming back. He gave his farewell speech, though, at the end of the final home game this season. And so looks like the ship has sailed. He's decided that he is not going to be on the team next year, or at least he's been told that he won't be retained, or whatever the case may be. This is a situation now where they're sort of in a bit of a rebuild, but they're probably going to have to fill out some guys behind Tyjae Spears, maybe a veteran to help bring him along, sort of like what Derrick Henry was doing, but maybe potentially also going out in the draft and grabbing someone. Don't see any of these workhorse backs at the top of the free agency board going to Tennessee.
I agree with you. I don't think they're going to end up grabbing one of these guys. I think they're okay with what they have in Spears, but also I think they can make some good work with one of these guys that's not a starter, but is just sitting in the free agency market. I mean, a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, imagine that backfield. You kind of just give the defense something different to look at. And one of those guys that's sitting on the free agency market definitely is just going to be a committee guy, I would think, next to Spears.
So now we head to the NFC, and we have to start in the NFC East with Jerry World. The Dallas Cowboys, and it is never a dull moment out there in Texas. And obviously, Tony Pollard was a big topic of discussion, and whether or not he'd be retained this year. We're talking about the Dak Prescott extension that seems to be looming, and they've been talking about that. He's going to get this huge mega deal to make him a Cowboy for life, and on and on. I don't know that Tony Pollard actually factors into their future plans, especially, talking, their weapons. CeeDee Lamb, it also seems that he's going to get a big deal. I don't know that Tony Pollard's going to be the guy there. I think that this is a potential, even a Saquon Barkley play where they try to go, get him from the Giants or something like that. That would be a very Jerry-like move. And so I think that that's the sort of thing that's coming here. But I also think that they are going to go after one of these big name guys, if not multiple big name guys, and see which one they can get.
Yeah, I mean, who's the biggest name on the board? I think Jerry Jones says, all right, yep, we're going to look at him. So, I agree with you. I think that one of these big names here, I definitely think Jerry Jones can look at them. I agree with you that Pollard probably doesn't fit into their plans. I mean, they have to pay a ton of guys now. Dallas does, and they said they're going to bring back Dak. So, I mean, all of this stuff, it's just it is an interesting spot. I don't think Pollard ends up in Dallas this next year. I agree with you.
All right, so we head out to Philadelphia. D'Andre Swift, another guy who had a pretty great year. He's a free agent this year. Boston Scott as well. Rashad Penny as well. So that just sort of leaves Kenneth Gainwell there. Another team that it seems like they're right on the cusp to come back and get themselves back into the Super Bowl. I think this is another spot where they go after, let's say, a Derrick Henry or something like that, even a Gus Edwards. Like, I think that they're going to go after some guy that's not at the very top, like Austin Eckler or Josh Jacobs, but I also think that they're going to go after a pretty good running back here to solidify what they had just a few years ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it is interesting because I feel like D'Andre Swift is like right in the middle of that pack and probably a good guy to continue with based on the season that he had. I know that they're probably going to want to go elsewhere, just looking at it at first. But, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed if I'm Philly of keeping a guy like D'Andre Swift. He was healthy this year, and he did a lot of great things in this backfield, even with all of those guys behind him. So, I mean, I would say give him another shot here. I would think that's probably the best option on the board right now for Philly.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that, they weren't impressed with Swift, especially towards the end of the season, it seemed like. So I'm going to say that they use him almost as a fallback option. They're going to try to go out and see what they can get. They can't get anyone. Swift is okay. He did well for us last year, and on we go. Moving over to their cross state rivals, the New York Giants. Saquon Barkley, the big picture here, and lots of questions about his future. And he was at the NHL Stadium Series this past week talking about it at MetLife Stadium. He wants to be a Giant. He wants to stick around. Obviously, money talks. There is the potential that he does get tagged for about $12 million. And I think that that's going to end up being the solution before they work out some sort of couple-year deal. As far as it goes, though, I don't know how the Giants would give up on Saquon Barkley, especially when there's been so much going against them from the offensive standpoint, and he's the only thing going right.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more about the Giants giving up on Saquon Barkley rather than Saquon Barkley giving up on the Giants. Because, I mean, you said money talks. Like, if somebody comes in with a big offer for a talented running back, a really talented running back like Saquon, and how can you turn that down? I mean, it's difficult, but you got to get paid at some point. You can't keep going like this year after year, getting a franchise tag with the talent that he has. So It's an interesting one. I think he'll end up back in New York. He wants to be a Giant. He try and work things out, but he's going to need to get paid sooner rather than later because, I mean, you can only go so long with a talented player like that and just keep giving him a franchise tag.
Yeah, agree. Moving over to Washington with the Commanders, Dan Quinn obviously hired in, so brand new staff coming along after Riverboat Ron gets the boot. Brian Robinson, he was pretty good last year, and I think that they're going to look to continue that bit of consistency. Antonio Gibson, he is the only free agent out of the running back. Chris Rodriguez Jr. is an interesting name to watch here, especially from a dynasty perspective. If you have a league where you can trade in the offseason, might be a guy worth investing in, and they talked very highly about him in the last coaching staff. Curious to see here what Dan Quinn and his staff think of him, but might be a guy that you can go out and grab for basically peanuts with a chance that he ends up as the number 2 or the 1B in this option. I don't know that Washington's in a spot right now, especially if they go ahead and draft a rookie quarterback, that they're going to go out and sign some big name running back. I think that it's going to kind of be status quo. Maybe they draft another running back to sit as a 2 or a 3 on the team, but not looking here as a workhorse back.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think looking at Washington right now, you mentioned the 2 guys there, Rodriguez as well as Robinson, and I mean they're pretty okay with those 2 guys. So really not a position of need, even though they lost Gibson. Maybe you bring in one more, whoever it is, but I don't think they're going to take a lot of a role in that offense with those 2 guys, Robinson and Rodriguez there.
All right, so moving out west, we head to San Francisco. Super Bowl finalist 49ers, and Zach, another team where looks like there's going to be a potential decision at running back behind Christian McCaffrey, of course, because he's going to be the number 1 slam dunk, number 1 pick, I believe, in pretty much every redraft next year, just based on the need at running back for that workhorse. And he seems to be the only one that kind of has his job clear cut, that he's going to be the number 1. Nobody's really going to compete with him. It's behind him, though, that I really have the question mark whether they end up getting rid of Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell. Seems like one of them is going to end up on the outs, just based on how the money is and the contracts, but not really looking for them to go out and get any sort of big name guy. It might just be, drafting another guy like Tyrion Davis-Price had. That's sort of where it lies, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could say they don't need really too much behind Christian McCaffrey. That's not really one of their worries. They're probably going to clean up some stuff elsewhere that hurt them ultimately in the Super Bowl. The running back was not one of those positions that hurt them. So it's going to end up being either one of those young guys or you bring in some veteran. I don't even think they're really looking in the free agency market for a running back right now. I think it's just going to go or be there in the draft.
Yep. Moving over to the Los Angeles Rams, and it was, another guy who was a bit of a workhorse back. We didn't really see it coming early on in the season. Cam Akers was the starter in week 1, and it looked like, okay, well, he's going to have a 1-2 punch with Kyren Williams, and quickly got, ousted from Los Angeles. Kyren becomes the workhorse back, and it didn't really seem like anybody was competing with him other than obviously when Kyren got hurt and they needed to bring in Ronnie Rivers, Royce Freeman to go take the load. Ronnie Rivers now a free agent, so he's a restricted free agent at that, and so they'll probably bring him back. I think this is status quo though for the Rams, as they kind of have a young core of 4 really good young running backs.
Agreed. I think right now it's Kyren Williams' backfield. Clearly, they really love him. They've been saying that for a couple of years now. Really, really huge fans of Kyren Williams. The one thing I'll say is, I mean, he's a little bit different from those traditional running backs that you see of a Christian McCaffrey and a Saquon Barkley, where they're clearly a workhorse. I still think he needs a tiny bit of time to become that full workhorse because injuries happen, and especially at the running back position. So they need to be prepared behind him if something does happen ultimately.
Yep. Moving out over to Seattle, I think that status quo as well. And it's Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. DJ Dallas, who's making nothing, he gets the boot as a UFA. They go out and they'll probably either draft somebody late or just grab a depth option off of whoever somebody else doesn't grab. This is, to me, Zach Charbonnet is probably going to take a little bit more of a step forward than he had. And we saw that down the stretch of the season to where it's more of a 50-50 spot. But yeah, I think that it's status quo. Kenneth Walker looked awesome, obviously, last year, won a lot of people's championships. And then Zach Charbonnet also added a bit of a depth for the dynasty community. I think that was really important.
Yeah, I mean, they've worked on this running back room the last couple of years. I don't think they are doing it for a third year in a row. So I think just staying away here.
Yeah, and obviously, like, it's going to be a little different with Pete Carroll not there, but they're still going to play that same brand of football. I don't see them really tailing away from that. Arizona, though, another interesting spot here, and they're sort of going to head into a rebuild, it seems like, but also it could be pretty quick. They have James Conner. He's still under contract. They bring in Michael Carter from the Jets heading down the stretch last year. Amari DiMercato, he also is on the roster. I think this is another spot where they're going to kind of try to add some pieces elsewhere, probably more on the defensive end, I would guess, if they don't go out and obviously grab Marvin Harrison Jr. in the draft. But that's sort of where I think their needs are. I don't think that running back really is their big thing.
Yeah, I agree, Brett. I think looking at it, it's Connor as the main guy, but those other two guys behind him, DiMercato as well as Carter. Obviously, they went out to get Carter, but three solid guys to have in a running back room. I don't think they're looking really anything close to running back this year.
All right, so moving along, now we go to the NFC North. Then, Zach, we really don't have to even talk about this team. It's the Detroit Lions, and I just think that this is going to be, again, status quo, keep moving forward. This was one of the best 1-2 punches that we saw in all of football over the last couple seasons in Detroit. You know, these two guys are going to end up being there, I think, for the next couple of years, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. It was special to watch.
Yeah, why go away from it? I think they definitely will give them some money at some point, but they don't need to right now. I think it's just fine as it is, and they're going to be making a push next year. They're the team to watch out for, definitely heading into next year.
So now moving along to Green Bay, AJ Dillon, he is a free agent. Patrick Taylor is a restricted free agent, expecting him back. But this is a decision to make here as far as it goes. Listen, AJ Dillon was only making $1.3 million. Seemed like he was the guy that was going to be the future running back on this team. Aaron Jones, there were a lot of rumors just a couple of years ago that it was kind of towards the end of his Packer tenure. He was going to go out the door with Aaron Rodgers, the same thing. Didn't really work out like that. And it seems like Aaron Jones is going to stick around at least for the next couple of years here. AJ Dillon, I'm curious whether you think he will stay a Packer or if he will leave for more money elsewhere.
I think he's gone. I think he's out the door here. Because I mean, he had that time where he was behind Aaron Jones and kind of moved along as a really solid backup, but I think he can get a bigger role somewhere where he's a pure power back. We've seen, obviously, Aaron Jones has gotten a fair amount of those carries plus the work in the receiving game. So he's gotten both of those, and AJ Dillon has gotten some obviously touches as the power back, but it's definitely not standing out for me keeping him in Green Bay. I think he's going to find a role somewhere where they utilize him as that power back next to one of those not mediocre, but I think solidified guys right next to one of those players who has a solidified spot, but they may be looking for just another guy in the offense right next to him.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a young, up and coming offense. They're going to continue to grow together, and so they might go out and just draft a running back. I think that it's the potential spot where they can almost groom him behind Aaron Jones, sort of what we saw with AJ Dillon. But this would obviously be a guy who's under contract for quite a few years, and you reset the rookie scale a little bit, at least for the running back position, and sort of groom him into being the Packers running back for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so moving along to Minnesota, and Zach, another interesting spot. A lot of question marks as far as the future of this team at quarterback. A lot of question marks at tight end, because obviously you're dealing with the TJ Hawkinson injury heading into next year. It looks like, I'm not really sure what you think about the running back position. It wasn't that strong with Alexander Mattison last year, to the point where they had to bring in Cam Akers. He's now a free agent. Obviously, he's going off an Achilles injury. So, we're probably not going to see him in a Vikings uniform after this year. And if he is, then it's going to be at very minimal money, and he's an RFA. So nobody will really will go out and grab him. I think that Dwayne McBride really showed some strides this year, and as did Ty Chandler. This potentially could be a status quo, if not just a minor depth option.
Interesting. Right now, Brett, I think this is Ty Chandler's backfield. I think he showed something at the end of the year that Minnesota just hadn't seen since they had Dalvin Cook. I think that he definitely was the closest thing this year that they had to a guy like Dalvin. Those 3 or 4 or 5 games towards the end of the season, he was unbelievable. So, I mean, I think this is his running back room. I think he'll be the main guy. I do think they'll still have a guy like Madison and maybe a guy like McBride getting a couple touches here and there, but I think the main running back here is Ty Chandler. He like I said, the last stretch that they had of the season after it was their playoff chances were done and Kirk Cousins was out, Ty Chandler looked really, really good. So I'd stick with that.
So heading over to Chicago, we see Donta Foreman. He is the only free agent there. Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson. I don't know why I stumbled over his name. Roschon Johnson. I think it's going to just continue to be that 1-2 punch. Maybe they go out and get a depth option. Another team that has a ton of draft picks, a ton of cap space. I think a lot of those needs are going to be put elsewhere.
Agreed. They have 2 running backs there. I don't think they're really going to go away from that. I do think Roschon Johnson will take a step up from last year to this year now, as Khalil Herbert was kind of just inconsistent, which is the Bears running backs. They're usually just inconsistent, right? And I think they're just going to keep it going with those 2.
Heading over to the NFC South, where we end here, Tampa Bay. They don't really need a running back. They got a 25-year-old Rachaad White, Chase Edmonds sitting behind him, and Sean Tucker. Zach, again, this is going to be one of those where they sort of need to fill their needs elsewhere. And we obviously talk Mike Evans. We'll talk about him on our next episode as we hit pass catchers. Chase Edmonds, he's a running back who's going to be a free agent this year, only $1.2 million. So, the potential that they bring him back, I'm thinking that they're going to probably go elsewhere as far as the running back position goes to fill that second spot. But I don't think it's going to be any of these top tier guys.
I agree. Probably a backup, maybe in this free agent market. I would say more of a veteran rather than going to the draft, but either way, it kind of works. But it's White's backfield right now.
I think this could be the potential, just based on how White plays. This could be your potential AJ Dillon landing spot, as we just spoke about him a little bit ago. Like, I feel like, to be able to add the pass catcher and White, to be able to add the between the tackles guy and AJ Dillon, it can almost form that punch that they have in, say, Detroit. And it would be a younger pairing, which I think it makes it even more valuable.
Yeah, definitely could be a good option.
All right, so heading over to New Orleans, where the Saints are. Zach, I mean, we talk Alvin Kamara, we talk Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams, James Robinson. Those are the guys on the roster right now. I don't know that they're really going to go out and get anybody that's top tier. And obviously their cap situation sort of has dictated that it's not going to end up being a big year for them in free agency. I don't really see any big changes here.
Agreed. They got 2 young running backs behind, as well as Alvin Kamara there. So, I mean, you're not going anywhere with that.
Heading over to Atlanta, and obviously it's the Bijan Robinson show. But what's going on behind Bijan? Obviously, you have Algier and then Cordarrelle Patterson. Cordarrelle Patterson is a free agent this offseason. Zach, do you really see any big changes heading at the depth part of the Falcons?
Maybe a veteran behind those two, but probably not going to get even a big workload. I think this is the workload of Bijan plus the work from Algier behind them, because they love Algier, so they're definitely going to still continue to give him touches.
Yeah, and Patterson's 33 years old. He's going to be making $5 million. Obviously, he's going to make less on this next deal, and so they might even just bring him back. If obviously he wants to come back, and so that's kind of where I see, them going as far as it. But they're probably not going to go out and go grab some big name free agent because they got Bijan, and that's pretty special.
Agreed.
All right, so we end our NFL teams here with the Carolina Panthers. Zach, it was a nightmare across the board for Carolina. As far as the needs go, it's sort of just all over the board outside of Adam Thielen and obviously Bryce Young. Chuba Hubbard, he's there. Miles Sanders, he's obviously under that bigger contract, but it seems like Chuba ended up taking most of the snaps, and he was the starter for pretty much the entire season. Don't really see much change here. Use that money elsewhere. They don't have a first-round pick, so that also kind of puts into the equation of, hey, now you're going to have to try to go out and just kind of fill out a team. This could be a few years before we actually see Carolina striking for one of those big-name free agents.
It could be a couple of years before we see Carolina doing anything. We're on the track that they're on right now. Obviously, no first-round pick. It's just bad times there. But as long as they keep developing Bryce Young, that's what they got to focus on. I don't think getting a running back in there, another running back, helps them in any ways.
Yeah, I agree. So let's jump right now into, we hit all of our NFL teams. Let's jump into some of these free agents and some of the spots we think they could potentially end up at. And then, we'll head towards the deeper guys later on and what we think they could potentially do. Let's start out, though, with Austin Ekeler, a guy who obviously, from a fantasy perspective, household name. Everybody really was excited about him heading into this year, and it seemed like, okay, this is going to be the big year of Austin Ekeler. Turned out to not be that at all. Just kind of a shame how it ended up unfolding, and now we head into this questionable offseason where it's kind of iffy as far as the Chargers go, because now we have a new coach come in, Jim Harbaugh. He wants to go out. He wants to get a big name guy. That he's going to go out and get a big name running back, especially if he loses Austin Ekeler. But as we said earlier, this very well could just be Austin Ekeler getting the money. New regime comes in, has a completely different look about him, and they go out and they just grab him.
That's fair. I think they need to pay up on him because, like I said, I don't know if he's just willing to sit there and be like, all right, well, I'll get some money and call it a day. He's going to want this because it's going to end up being probably his last contract. So that's a big thing in my mind. Will they give it to him? I think they will end up doing that just because he's going to be a really, really key piece in their offense. And I don't see them trusting too much of the guys behind him or going elsewhere in the free agent market, because I don't think any of those guys really fit the regime like a guy like Austin Ekeler. So I think he ends up staying in LA.
Yeah, and I think if he leaves to go elsewhere, it's going to end up being to one of those teams that potentially loses their big name running back, like the Raiders, like the Eagles could potentially be a landing spot. New York, obviously, the Giants, could potentially be a landing spot if they give him the money and Saquon wants to go elsewhere. Even the Cowboys potentially could be a landing spot as Jerry goes after his big name guys. But I don't know that he's going to go to any other team where he can't be the number one guy. I think that that's pretty important to him. He's not going to go fill in as a depth option. And why would he and why should he?
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, so jumping over to our next guy here, it's Josh Jacobs. And yeah, we talked about him at the top. And he seems to be the top number one option in a lot of consensus rankings as far as these free agents go. This is a real question here about what Antonio Pierce wants to do. And it's also a big question about whether Josh Jacobs was able to be influenced by Antonio Pierce as we headed down the stretch. And it seemed like the locker room was won over to the point where Max Crosby even said, well, if you don't bring in Antonio Pierce as your full-time head coach, I'm leaving and I'm requesting a trade. Seems like a guy like Devontae Adams was really excited by him. And I'm curious what went on in the head of Josh Jacobs. He wasn't really public about anything, and obviously he wants to get paid. I'm curious if there's some sort of happy medium here where he gets paid, gets to stay.
Yeah, I think Josh Jacobs is going to end up being in Las Vegas. I mean, Pierce came in and really just rejuvenated this team. They were at the all-time low, you could say, because of just things that went on. And he came in and was just really, really like a powerful, meaningful head coach. So talked about Josh Jacobs as the heart. He said actually the heartbeat of the Raiders offense, which I can't disagree with him. I think this offense circles around Josh Jacobs and what goes on there. So I think they're going to end up giving Josh Jacobs the money. I think he deserves the money, and I think he'll end up being in Las Vegas.
What's sort of interesting is where Josh Jacobs is from, and that's Tulsa, Oklahoma. Potentially could end up picking on one of those Texas teams as well as they come knocking. Dallas is only 4 hours away. Houston's only a couple hours away as well. Two teams who could potentially go pay up for him. So I would at least keep my eye on those two, just based on him being able to live closer to home and be there. And obviously Texas with the taxes and all of that, I think that also comes into play a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so next up is Saquon Barkley, and we also talked about him at the top of the show. Saquon, listen, I agree with what you just said just a few minutes ago, which is not if the Giants want Saquon Barkley, but if Saquon Barkley wants the Giants. He's 27. Doesn't really seem like the Giants are going to make a dent in the next year or two. This could potentially be an option where Saquon can go elsewhere and win and have the shot at winning. Again, I just said it at the top of the show. I think Jerry Jones is going to make a big play for him. I think that Baltimore might make a big play for him. Potentially even Houston, although I don't really see that. But I think he's going to end up sticking with the Giants because I think the Giants sort of realize that their whole offense runs through Saquon Barkley, and so they're going to kind of pay up here.
I like it, but I think he's ready to win. And I think he's going to end up on the Dallas Cowboys because I think Jerry's going to give him all the money in the world. I know he'll be hated, but I don't think he'll care if he's going to win. So I don't think the thing you said that stood out, of course, was the Giants don't look like they're winning anytime soon. So what is Saquon doing there? Like, I get it being a Giant and just through and through, but I think he's going to want to win. So, there you go. You heard it here first. He's going to Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's from the Bronx, and so I think that that sort of holds weight. And I know that playing for your favorite team growing up, like that's a big deal. And to be hated by the fans for the rest of your life, like I don't know that he would want to do that. I think that he truly does want to be a Giant. I think it just really comes down to the money, though, because yeah, there might be a situation where Jerry pays double of what the Giants are offering, and I think he obviously wouldn't be able to pass that up to have a go at a Super Bowl opportunity. So yeah, I agree. As far as the two suitors, I really think at the end are going to be Dallas and New York, especially if they can almost kill two birds with one stone in Dallas, and you know take them away from the Giants, a division rival. But yeah, I think that the Giants are going to basically have their hand forced, and they're going to have to pay up if they want to keep Saquon.
Yeah, I mean that's the story right there.
All right, so jumping to our next guy here, and it's the guy out in Dallas. It's Tony Pollard, and Zach, he's going to turn 27 in April, and this was not a great year for Tony Pollard. He went down as one of the biggest busts across the redraft format here. As far as dynasty goes, a lot of people were selling him off this year, and rightfully so. It seemed like the price tag on him was pretty high, even though he wasn't having a good year. And now he's a free agent. Curious to see where he lands, but I don't know that it's going to end up being Dallas because, like we said, the impatience of Jerry Jones over the years, I think, really takes it away. This might end up being a guy who ends up going into a committee. And I don't say a committee as in like he's going to do a 50-50 split. He'll probably be the one in a committee. I'm talking about maybe Houston going after him. He gets to stay in Texas, work with Dameon Pierce, still gets most of the carries. Pierce gets whatever 30% of the carries or so. That's sort of where I see him going. I don't think that this is going to be some big long-term high money deal because he didn't prove it this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to end up going somewhere else that's not Dallas because Saquon's going to go there, Brett. And he's going to end up being the 1-2 in he's going to be the one in a 1-2. So, just because I don't see him really just taking over a backfield. There's kind of the level of these free agents, and I see him middle of the pack. I don't see him with those top guys. So I agree. I think he'll end up going somewhere else and just being the number one guy there.
All right, so we jump over to our next guy here, and it's Derrick Henry, 30 years old. Derrick Henry, he is a beast. He just is, plain and simple, just a freak athlete. Even through all the injuries that he's had, he still has some left in the tank, and that was pretty clear heading down the stretch of the season. And yeah, the injury concerns there, so you're not going to throw him out there to a team where he's going to get 30 carries a game anymore. I think those days are long gone. But obviously, he's not going to go back to Tennessee, it seems like. I think this is the Baltimore Ravens. I just have this feeling that they really, really wanted him last year. They made multiple plays for him at the trade deadline. Seems like it's a pretty good fit as far as the running game goes. And obviously they have a major focus on running. I think this is going to be one of two running backs that the Ravens go out and get. And they basically form this three-headed committee with him and Gus Bus.
We agree there. I think Baltimore is the best spot for a guy like Derrick Henry. Obviously, he already said that he was leaving. But I think staying in the AFC, team that's seen him plenty of times in Baltimore, I mean, what can really go wrong there? I think you're getting him for a lower price than you normally would when you were thinking about it a couple of years ago. So I agree that that's clearly right now in the market the best spot for Derrick Henry.
And I think just him being 30 years old, we're probably talking about a one-year deal at some, higher end money, probably like $10, $11 million. So, underneath those top tier guys, but it's a one-year deal. So it kind of works for him. And then they can almost take it year to year if he wants to stick around for another year and so on. But yeah, I think that there's going to be some sort of committee. We'll talk Gus Edwards in a little. But I think that that's going to end up being the 1-2 punch out there in Baltimore.
Definitely makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so now we head to DeAndre Swift. And Zach, we talked about the Eagles and their need to potentially improve on all fronts, but especially now, Jason Kelce seems like he's going to retire. At least that's what the rumors are. We'll see if he actually makes that announcement formal. So they're going to need some help on the line, an aging line. And obviously, running back a couple of years ago when they had Miles Sanders, it seemed like everything was stable. Then obviously he takes the money, goes to Carolina. They bring in DeAndre Swift from the Lions. And listen, it was a Swifty year for the Kelce family, but especially for the Eagle fans here, where they kind of fell in love with this guy. He was 5th in the entire league in rushing yards, and it was awesome to see. I don't know that the money is going to match what they want out of that running back position. They potentially are going to go after one of those bigger guys, potentially a Tony Pollard or something like that. And I like I said before, I think that Swift almost comes in as that fallback option because he didn't do anything wrong. He just didn't. Whether somebody wants to go out and overpay him, like say the New England Patriots or someone like that has a ton of money that could use another spot. We talked about Ramondre Stevenson needing a co-partner. Like DeAndre Swift would be pretty good with that, I think, as far as the pass catcher goes, side of it. So, as far as it goes with the Eagles, I think that it really just comes down to money with DeAndre Swift, whether or not he stays or goes.
Yeah, I think just looking at Swift, I don't know why I don't see any team, I should say, that I would see them paying him a lot. I don't know if there's any of the teams that we talked about, if they're losing a guy, they're going to pay up on a guy like Swift. So I think he's going to end up back in Philly. Yes, he's a fallback option for the Eagles, but I think it's just he was a good fit there. He definitely worked well in this offense. And I think they're just going to say, all right, why not? We'll go with it again.
Yeah, jumping to our next guy here, it's Ezekiel Elliott. Another guy who basically took a prove-it deal with the New England Patriots. And it was kind of surprising at first when we saw Zeke sign. And he's only 28 years old, which was, a lot of people peg him as this 30-plus-year-old. He's only 28. I still think he has more left in the tank. Obviously, he's not what he was when he first came into the league. But there was quite a bit of hype towards the end of the season as far as Zeke goes. He had a couple big weeks down the stretch of the season. I think that this is going to be one of those spots where he, sort of like what he did this past year with Ramondre Stevenson, he goes into a room with some younger guys, and he essentially can be himself. Maybe Tampa Bay. We were talking about Rachaad White at the top. I think that would be a perfect landing spot for him. But he's going to get paid on a 1-year deal. That would be where I would peg him, though.
It was pretty funny. We think alike. The Tampa Bay was the top team on my mind there. So I just one of those kind of rooms where the top guy is more of a receiving back, and then you rely on that power back. He's a top a name on the board when it comes to those guys, and the other guy is AJ Dillon. So obviously the more experienced guy or the younger and up and coming guy. So a lot of guys for these teams to choose from. So yeah, I think he's going to end up behind one of those not experienced running backs, but a guy that has the number one job right now, and he's just going to fit in right behind them. It could end up being a team like the New York Jets, maybe, because just a power back behind Breece Hall. It could end up being one of those. So definitely would keep teams like that, them, Buffalo, those teams just on the radar.
It's fair. And listen, I also think that watching what he went through this year in New England, where it was just pretty much torture going from Dallas to New England, and the success that he had in the year with Dallas versus what he just experienced in New England, I think that he's going to want to go to a team that probably is right on the cusp of winning. Whether that's Tampa, who was just in the playoffs, whether that's a room like Jacksonville, where you have Etienne, and then you can kind of stick him in there behind Etienne. and he's, the for sure number 2 guy. And it seems like that's another team that's sort of on the ramping up. I think I agree with you when you said the Jets also. It is going to be one of those type teams that are right there on the cusp. And they kind of need just a veteran guy to put them over the top. But yeah, I see him going in where he's obviously not going to be the one, and we're past that part of his career. But he can be a solid number 2.
Definitely.
All right, so now we hit the Gus bus, and I said it just a couple minutes ago. I think that this is going to be one of those where Baltimore goes up and they just grab him. He sort of proved himself this past year. It's not going to be this huge deal, and he's been very effective. He's been there for 5 years, and he got hurt in 1 year, so you take 4 seasons. Like, he's been really, really good. He's just been a solid, reliable option. And so I think that they're going to continue to go out, grab him. He's going to be 29. So it's not an age thing. But due to the age, I think the contract's not going to be as high, which actually helps them. Again, I think this is going to be a Gus Edwards, Derrick Henry pairing here, and they probably go out and get a third guy as the option behind them.
Agreed. I mean, it's kind of one of those guys where he's been in Baltimore for all that time. So they love him. They're going to probably just give him some money and he'll stay there, maybe be a Raven for a long, long time. So, but it's worked well. So it definitely makes sense. I don't really see him wanting to go elsewhere. I think he's definitely made his spot in Baltimore.
So jumping to our next guy here, it's A.J. Dillon. Zach, we both sort of think that he's on the way out. Where could he potentially end up, though, I think is the question.
So I think it's more of kind of what we were talking about with Ezekiel Elliott, as I don't know if he's going to get like a main number 1, because I don't think he is a number 1. I think he's a 1A, 1B. However, one of those, it's going to be hard to come by. Maybe one of those teams that I mentioned already, like a Tampa Bay or a Jets or a Bills. I know he may not love that, but I think he's going to get a little bit more opportunity than he got in Green Bay, because I don't think he got much opportunity because there's some of those guys, James Cook, Breece Hall, as well as a guy like Rachaad White. They've all been really, really good in the passing game, and they've been good in the running game, but it takes them to another level if they have a power back like an A.J. Dillon right behind them. I think that's where his role mainly is. I don't think there's a team available right now where he can slot in and just be a number 1. I just don't think that's in the cards for him.
Yeah, so a few years ago, he had 1,100 yards. This past year, only 613 yards, only 2 touchdowns. And so, yeah, it was a career low in yards per attempt for him. I think that, the downturn has led to his demise out there in Green Bay. I think that they're going to go with other options. This really just screams Buffalo Bills to me. I'm not sure why. I just think that that's a really good fit for them as a power back. Again, we saw last year they tried to get Lat Murray in. They got Leonard Fournette in. They were trying to get that power back. Now you talk about a power back who's young, potentially can come in, be an option there for a few years. He's going to be 26. And so can kind of grow with James Cook out there. I think that is the potential option that we see in Buffalo.
Yeah, great option for Buffalo. Definitely a guy to look out for.
All right, so we now move on to Zach Moss, who we talked about a bit when we were talking about Jonathan Taylor and that contract. Obviously, this was a pretty big year for Zach Moss. 794 yards, 5 touchdowns on 183 carries. Also added 192 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. Zach, this was a big deal for him because I think that this sort of earned him probably a multi-year contract. He's still pretty young. I don't know that the money's going to be amazing, but it's going to be there now because I think that he's proven that he can be a solid option. Just not really sure on the landing spot. I mean, I talked earlier about the Cleveland Browns and how they sort of need this stopgap before Nick Chubb comes up. And I don't know that that's going to be a Kareem Hunt Zach Moss might actually end up being that guy. That to me is the potential option if the Colts don't bring him back, obviously.
Interesting. I think I can go a lot of different ways on it because there's a lot of teams open, but I feel like if he can be either a number 2 or just like a 1B, like maybe a team like the Denver Broncos, I don't know, like they relate a little bit as players, him and Javonte, but I feel like Javonte more of the passing game. He could get work done there as he gets as he recovers, continues to recover from that big injury a couple years ago. So options like that, I think, is the best place for a guy like Zach Moss. That could end up being a stopgap in Cleveland. But I do agree with you. A multi-year deal, just being maybe a 1-2 punch with somebody, wherever that is. I definitely think the landing spot is, you said it, it's the question mark.
Yep. So now moving on to what I have now dubbed the Achilles crew. J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, these are two guys that obviously, come off big Achilles injuries from this past year. Let's just briefly talk about each one of them. We'll start out with Dobbins. Zach, this guy has not been healthy, plain and simple, his entire career. He just hasn't. And so I think that there will be a market, but I don't know that it's going to be a very big market. I think this is going to be more of a flyer thing. I'm going out on a limb here with my landing spot here. I'm going to say the Kansas City Chiefs go out and grab him on a very cheap deal. It's a potential boom option just based on how he came onto the scene in the NFL. Not a huge need at running back for Kansas City. Not a lot of money that Kansas City has on its cap space, but the potentially low risk, high reward that they get a 1-2 punch out of Pacheco and J.K. Dobbins.
Fair. I don't even know if he's going to be like a 1-2 punch. I think he's at the spot right now where it's all right. He's going to probably work out for a couple teams and somebody's going to say, oh, all right, I kind of like him. A flyer like that, I could see a team like a Philadelphia just stashing him as part of they have like 4 running backs all the time. So like one of them could be J.K. Dobbins. Of course, and if it doesn't work, then you got 3 other guys right next to him. So it's kind of one of those rather than just getting a solid role just because of the injuries. It's hurt him year after year, and it's going to be hard to get a big role like that just based on the risk that comes with getting a guy there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I also think that, he is a Houston native. That's another potential team that could just kind of take a flyer on him. Hometown guy, could stick around. And obviously that's an organization that's sort of building year to year. And, they're up and coming. So that's another potential spot that could take a flyer on a hometown guy. But yeah, I think that, the reason I say the Chiefs is just strictly money because they really don't have money on the cap. You have to go out and try to get talent somehow. And obviously, if you're drafting towards the end of the draft in each round, you're not going out and grabbing the top end of talent. You have to get it from somewhere else. If you don't have money to spend on free agents, you got to figure it out. I think it's a potential low risk, high reward for them where I think that would almost be a better option than like, say, a CEH.
Definitely fair. Makes sense.
All right. And then as far as Cam Akers goes, Zach, we talked about him at the top of the show, played 7 games, 167 yards, 2 touchdowns. This was, a year to forget. And then obviously it ends with an Achilles injury. And it wasn't the same Achilles that he tore the first time. So now we're talking about both of his Achilles have now been torn. This could potentially be the end of the line for Cam Akers. I don't know that he's going to really find any landing spot. This could be one of those where they sort of wait and see into next season, kind of like what we saw with Kareem Hunt, where he sort of comes in, week 4, week 5, and one of those teams has a running back injury and needs to fill a need. That's sort of where I see Cam Akers, even though he's only 25 years old. But I just think that 2 Achilles injuries really are going to kill his career here.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mean, you look at it, it kind of happened mid-season, of course, as well. So that doesn't help his cause. It could lead into next season. Um, I agree that it's going to be hard to get a spot anywhere right now.
And then, of course, we hit the best of the rest. Just wanted to group all these next tier of guys in. But from what I wrote down here, we got Kareem Hunt, Devin Singletary, Antonio Gibson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Donta Foreman. Zach, anybody notable stand out, or all these guys is going to kind of just, stick towards the end of training camp?
I mentioned CEH before. I'm sticking with that dream spot of Tennessee because I think that's just a good fit. You got a young running back in Tyjae Spears. You're gonna need somebody behind him. Of course, Henry's gone. I think Spears is more of a receiving back. I mean, he is. So, but he can run the ball. However, if you get a power back, like one of those guys that we were talking about, there's a whole list of them. I think CEH is a guy that kind of falls a little bit under the radar. Stays in the AFC. I don't see why this would be a bad option there for the Titans.
Yeah, to me, I have Devin Singletary as a guy that, a couple of years ago, he was the number one guy out in Buffalo, and he earned it. And he looked like he was going to stick as the number one. They end up not being able to come to terms on a deal. He ends up going to Houston on a 1-year prove-it deal. Now he's out there again, and I have a feeling that the Green Bay Packers might actually be that team that come calling to him. I think it's an interesting fit. I think they're going to get outbid on an A.J. Dillon type scenario where they can bring him back, because I think that they want him back, but they want him back for cheap. I think that Singletary essentially can form this, 1A, 1B with Aaron Jones, even though Aaron Jones is going to end up being the 1A to a bigger extent. I think that, in the case that Aaron Jones goes down, which we've seen in the last couple of seasons, he has gone down. They sort of need that option behind him. Singletary seems to be a solid piece.
Yeah, I agree. And you said it, the risk maybe with Aaron Jones, and yes, he's going to be coming back, but the age is getting up there. So you never know what's going to happen. I agree. That could be a good spot for Singletary.
All right. So that'll do it for us for this episode. Check out our next episode. Not sure if it's going to be next week or the week after that, but it will certainly be before free agency. We're going to preview the pass catchers. So guys that are wide receivers, tight ends, and obviously there's a lot of looming decisions, and we've heard the rumor mill about Mike Evans and whether he's going to stay or go. We've heard some trade winds about the potential of Devontae Adams and whether or not he will be traded or if he will stick around in Las Vegas. I think that, after that top tier kind of dies out as far as the receivers go, unlike where we just talked today, running backs, it's a lot of top end talent. Zach, what do you think about just pass catchers in general here?
I'm excited for it. It's a good one. There's a lot of guys really on the radar. The big guy that I'm looking for, yeah, Mike Evans is there, but T. Higgins, I think that's just a big question mark of what's going to happen. Where's he going to go? In my mind, he's the biggest receiver on the board just because of age and the talent that he can bring. He's a number one. If he's not on Cincinnati, he's a number one somewhere. So should be an interesting one.
Yeah, and listen, there's also the potential that some of these guys get tagged, and obviously we'll bring you that when we talk about it next week and all the updates that are coming in. And obviously, yeah, we talk T. Higgins, we talk Mike Evans potentially could get tagged. I don't think that he will. Michael Pittman as well. Some of those other guys. A lot to discuss though, as far as those guys go, and check out some of the other episodes, as I said at the top, of what we did last week, where we talked about the quarterbacks and some of the buy lows, sell highs, and the dynasty perspective. Subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. In the words of Aaron Rodgers, what's going, we shall rise it again. We'll catch you on the next one with our pass catchers free agency preview. For Zach Malaman, I'm Brett Malaman. This has been the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.